Senator Perdue.
Well, I certainly look forward to voting for you. I am excited that you're willing to do this. I want to echo what the former governor just mentioned about the audit. I want to congratulate you on the first audit in the history of the United States on our defense spending. Since 1990, we had the law that required every president to do it, and yet this president was the first one that required it, and you executed it as CFO. And I want to congratulate you and thank you on that, and echo what Senator King just mentioned about staying on point, and I know you will. I've got a question. But before I get into these 2 points, though, I want to echo what you just said in answer to Senator Manchin's question about the demand issue. I think we all know that spending $738 billion is a big expense. We spent another $200 billion on our veterans. Mm-hmm. But in a world that's more dangerous than any time in my lifetime, I can't see any way around that, neither can President Trump. But I want to assure the American people something. I'd like to echo what you said, that China right now, if you adjust what they're spending for purchasing power parity and bring in other accounts that they don't talk about in terms of their R&D and all that they do through their civilian and commercial enterprises, they're spending about the same as we are right now. Mm-hmm. And they've done this in the last decade when we disinvested our military by 25%. It's the third time in the last 50 years that we've had presidents disinvest in the military, and every time we saw other actors around the world become nefarious, and that's what we see this time. Specifically, this week, there are reports that China has signed a secret agreement allowing its armed forces to use a Cambodian Navy base. Beijing works to boost its ability to project military power around the region. This is on top of what they've already done to militarize the South China Sea, what they did in foreclosing that port south of Colombo in Sri Lanka, what they did in foreclosing on that port in Karachi, what they've done with 36 ports with proprietary loans in Africa and 51 ports around South America. Mr. Secretary, what do we do in this environment? What do you plan to do as the COO with Secretary Esper and our military leadership in uniform to stand up to this growing threat? We're making the transition from dealing with terrorists for the last 20 years to now dealing with near-peer threats that are accelerating while we're trying to get going again.
Right. So the challenge is you've got countries like China who engaged in predatory lending to their neighbors, setting up debt traps, who are occupying territory that the international community recognizes does not belong to them, militarizing it despite their promises not to do so, and then dramatically ramping up their investments and their spending in defense. That creates a broad range of challenges. And so at the one level, you have to put forward the force to deter them, to keep them from going to a conflict, to keep them on the peaceful side. But then you've got to work in the gray zone and by, with, and through your allies to make sure people in the region are reassured and not feeling intimidated or drawn into those challenges. One of the things you talked about on defense is probably worth highlighting is defense spending right now is somewhere around 3.13% of GDP. 2010, it was 4.5%. Back in the Reagan era, it was 5.7%. So one of the unspoken stories is defense is a smaller and smaller share of our economy. Now, part of that is because we have a growing economy, which is a wonderful thing. But as a foundational expense to protect everything else, this is a smaller and smaller down payment, and I think that's an essential thing for people to keep in mind, even though the numbers are large.
Would you also agree, sir, that's a great point, that our allies need to stand up and shoulder a little bit more of the responsibility of this global peace that we've enjoyed for the last 75 years?
Absolutely.
I believe that the NDS, and the chairman does this every time, and I echo this, the NDS that was produced by Secretary Mattis when he was there and the team is one of the best documents that I've seen in my experience up here. It looks to me like in there are 3 success factors, though. One is consistent funding, and we are working hard. That's on our side of the ledger. I'm less concerned about the actual dollar amount than I am the fact that we have another 2 years. If we get the appropriation process done, and I'm confident we'll do that, we will now have 3 years in a row, first time in a decade, that we've been able to start the year without a continuing resolution. We've done it 186 times over the last 45 years. This military and our supply chain has become seduced to the fact, or hindered by the fact that we have handcuffed them in terms of consistent funding. So that's the first success factor. The second one is the supply chain. The supply chain right now is anemic. We have disinvested it. It is withered. We've got to rebuild it. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm talking about shipyards, maintenance depots, vendors, R&D capability, et cetera. The third and the most, and this is my question, personnel, the human factor. It's always the limiting issue, and it's also the big difference between us and the rest of the world. We're the innovators, we're the capital formation experts, but we have to train and recruit 270,000 roughly. You mentioned this yesterday, 270,000 people a year into our military. That's huge. I mean, that's the equivalent of many Fortune 20 companies, and we have to do that every year in a voluntary environment. Our near-peer competitors don't have a voluntary force. We are also carrying overhead with our veterans of about $200 billion a year. In that environment, as COO, how do you propose that we continue to be competitive in that environment, particularly on the personnel front?
So I think one of the things you have to do is you have to combine things. One is you have to give a competitive wage. You have to be able to draw people in to a lifestyle and a form of living that financially is not a tremendous sacrifice. But the answer is you're never going to be able to solve it completely that way. You're not going to. So you need to have a mission that draws them in. You have to have a community that takes care of them. You have to be careful about how often you deploy. You have to be careful about shutdowns and CRs and the disruption so that they would recognize that in the sacrifice they're making for service and the risks they're taking are being matched by the commitment to support them. And then, as you pointed out, is the training. The advantage of this volunteer force is their skill set, and if they're properly trained, there's nothing like it in the world. But each year is coming in another wave of people, 250,000 or more, and you have to maintain that level of training, or 3 years in, you've got a significant problem that will take you years to dig out of.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Chair.